The air was thick that summer, heavy with the scent of magnolia and decay. The old Whitmore plantation sat on a hill that once shimmered with wealth, its white columns now cracked, its gardens strangled by weeds. Time had turned the grand house into a graveyard of memories, and yet, if you stood still long enough, you could swear you heard it breathing. They called it the Whispering Plantation. Locals said the wind that passed through the cypress trees carried the voices of those who had never truly left. Whispers of sorrow, whispers of vengeance. And at the heart of that silence stood a barn, leaning, rotting and older than any structure still standing on the land. No one went near it after dark. The townsfolk claimed it was cursed. But the woman who owned the property, Lady Margaret Whitmore, did not believe in curses. She believed in control. Lady Margaret had inherited the estate after her husband's death, a stern woman with ice in her veins and perfection carved into every feature. Her reputation was that of a woman who smiled only when she was winning. But those who worked under her said her heart was darker than the soil she owned. Inside that sprawling mansion lived her only child, Evelyn, pale, quiet and fragile, as though she'd been born half in this world and half in another. Her father's passing had carved something out of her, leaving a hollow that her mother filled with rules, silence and fear. Evelyn rarely left her room. When she did, she moved like a ghost, slipping through the corridors as if afraid the walls were watching. Every morning, Lady Margaret would sit on the porch with her tea, gazing at the fields. And every morning, Evelyn would stand by the upstairs window, staring out toward the barn. It stood at the edge of the cotton fields, warped, sun-bleached wood, doors hanging crooked, a scar of black across its roof where lightning had struck years ago. The workers kept their distance from it. Even the animals refused to graze nearby. Rumors said that strange noises echoed from the barn long after sunset, low murmurs, chains clinking, footsteps where no one stood. Some said it was just the wind, others said it was something else. Something that remembered, but to Lady Margaret such talk was nonsense. She called it superstition, weakness, and on her plantation, weakness was not tolerated. She ran the estate with precision, a perfect rhythm of work and obedience. Every hour of every day had its rule, and in that order, Evelyn did not belong. At dinner she spoke little. Her hands trembled when she held her fork. Lady Margaret would watch her in silence, her sharp eyes cutting through her daughter's nervous glances. "Sit up straight, child," she'd say without looking up. "You shame the Whitmore name with that posture." "Yes, mother," Evelyn whispered, barely audible. Servants would come and go, heads bowed, afraid to meet either woman's eyes. It wasn't the kind of house that allowed laughter or warmth. It was a place where footsteps echoed too loudly and secrets grew like vines through the cracks of the floorboards. As the sun set, the house came alive in a different way. The crickets would fall silent, the night air would thicken, and from the open windows one could sometimes hear faint sobbing, a woman's voice. Though no one could ever tell from where it came, Evelyn would lie awake, clutching her bedsheets, her eyes on the ceiling. She could hear it too, the crying, soft at first, then desperate. When she told her mother, Lady Margaret only frowned. "There are no ghosts in this house," she said, "only fools who believe in them." But Evelyn knew what she heard. And sometimes she thought she recognized the voice. The workers whispered that the barn had once been used for something far darker than storage. That beneath its wooden floorboards lay things best left buried. But they dared not speak it aloud where Lady Margaret could hear. Punishment on that plantation was swift and cruel, and yet some nights the old caretaker swore he saw a candle flicker inside the barn. A shadow pacing back and forth, and once, just once, he claimed he heard someone calling Evelyn's name. The girl's health began to fade as the days grew hotter. She lost her appetite, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. Lady Margaret accused her of weakness, of hysteria, the curse of women with too much imagination. But Evelyn's fear was real. Every time she looked toward that barn, something inside her seemed to break. One morning, while the servants cleared the breakfast table, Evelyn gathered her courage and asked, "Mother, Why did father seal the barn before he died? Lady Margaret froze mid-sip. Her teacup trembled just slightly before she set it down. He sealed it for a reason that does not concern you, she said coldly. But enough. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. You will not speak of that place again. And that was the end of it. At least to Lady Margaret, but not to Evelyn. That night, when the house slept, Evelyn lit a small lantern and pressed her ear to her bedroom window. The night was still. Then, faintly, from the direction of the barn, she heard it again. A whisper, her name, slow, broken, but unmistakable. Evelyn. She froze. The flame of her lantern trembled. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone, or something, was calling her, and despite her fear, she could not look away from that dark silhouette of the barn against the moonlight. Whatever waited there, it knew her name. Morning came to the Whitmore plantation wrapped in haze and silence. The mist clung to the fields like a veil, hiding the scars of the land beneath. Birds no longer sang near the house. Even they seemed to sense that something in those walls wasn't meant to be disturbed. Upstairs, in the farthest corner of the east wing, behind a door that creaked like it was sighing, was Evelyn's room. It was a strange little place, too small for a lady of her standing, too full of shadows for comfort. She had chosen it herself when she was 13, saying she preferred its quiet. Her mother thought it odd, but she never argued. Lady Margaret had little time for a daughter who hid from the world. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and candle wax. The wallpaper had begun to peel in places, revealing the wooden boards beneath. A narrow desk sat by the window, its surface cluttered with old letters, ink bottles, and a single silver locket that had belonged to her father. The locket never left her sight. Each morning, Evelyn would sit there, staring out toward the barn. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. But her hands trembled as if she felt something. Something pulling her toward that decaying building at the edge of the fields. Beneath the loose floorboard by her bed was a secret. A small box wrapped in cloth. Inside it lay a collection of letters, each written in her delicate handwriting, but never sent. Dozens of them, sealed and hidden. The letters were addressed to no one. Each began the same way, to the one who waits in the dark. They were confessions, desperate, poetic, and filled with guilt. She wrote of hearing voices in her sleep, of seeing her reflection move when she didn't. She wrote of the barn, of lights that flickered behind its slats, of whispers that came from beneath the earth. In one letter, she mentioned something her father once told her when she was very young. There are things beneath this house, Evelyn. Things we pretend not to hear. She hadn't understood then. But now, years later, she feared she finally did. Lady Margaret never entered her daughter's room without knocking. She claimed it was out of respect for privacy, but in truth she couldn't stand being in that room for long. She said the air felt wrong, heavy, as though someone else was there. Still that afternoon, Margaret pushed open the door without warning. Evelyn jumped, quickly covering the open letter on her desk. "Writing again?" her mother said, her voice cool and unimpressed. "Yes, mother. Poetry." "Letters? To whom?" Evelyn hesitated. "No one, really. It helps me think." Lady Margaret gave her that look, sharp, appraising, filled with unspoken disappointment. "You think too much, child. Thinking leads to nonsense. I'd rather you read your scripture." She turned to leave but paused at the window. Her gaze drifted toward the barn. "You've been watching that place again," she said. "Don't." Evelyn's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Why not?" "Because your father wanted it forgotten." There was a flicker of something in Lady Margaret's eyes, not anger this time, but fear. It was gone almost as soon as it appeared. When she left, Evelyn locked the door and sank to her knees. She pulled out the hidden box again. The newest letter lay unfinished. She dipped her pen into the ink and continued to write. "Last night I heard them again. 3 voices. They were not angry, they sounded lost. I think they want me to find something. I think they want me to open the barn." Her hand shook as she wrote. She could still feel the way her name had floated through the night, soft and mournful. She didn't believe it was imagination anymore. That evening, as the sky bled into purple, Evelyn sat by the candlelight reading her old letters aloud, as though someone might answer back. Shadows danced on the wall, twisting and merging into shapes that didn't belong. She could almost swear she saw a face form in the dark corner of the room, not cruel, but pleading. "Who are you?" she whispered. A soft tap came from her window. Her heart jumped. She turned, expecting to see wind stirring the branches. But outside, beneath the glow of the moon, the barn door creaked open. Slowly, deliberately, and then closed again. Her breath caught. Someone or something was inside. She backed away from the window, clutching the locket at her neck. Her reflection in the glass seemed to waver, pale eyes, staring back at her that didn't quite match her own expression. From somewhere deep in the house came the faint sound of the grandfather clock striking midnight, and beneath it she heard something else, footsteps, slow, dragging footsteps just outside her door. She froze. The steps stopped right at her threshold. The handle turned just slightly, but the lock held. And then, a whisper, low and hollow just on the other side. "Don't let her." "Fine, you." Evelyn's knees gave out. The candle flickered out. For a long moment there was only silence. When she dared to open her eyes again, the handle was still. Whoever had been there was gone. In the morning, when she finally unlocked the door, a small envelope had been slipped beneath it. Inside, on a torn scrap of parchment, was written a single line in trembling ink. "The truth sleeps in the barn." Evelyn clutched the note to her chest, trembling. She didn't know who had sent it, but deep down she already knew what she would have to do next. She would go to the barn. Evening draped the Whitmore plantation in a veil of gold and dust. The sun sank low over the fields, turning the cotton a bruised orange like fire simmering just beneath the earth. The cicadas screamed their endless song, and somewhere in the distance a crow cried out, one sharp, hollow sound that faded into silence. The barn stood apart from everything else. A lonely skeleton of wood and rust. It leaned against the dying light like it was too tired to hold itself up. The boards had warped and split from years of storms. The paint peeled away long ago. But the strangest thing was the air around it. It felt wrong. Still. As if the world itself was holding its breath. Evelyn stood at the edge of the field, clutching the folded note she'd found beneath her door. Her fingers had worn the paper soft. "The truth sleeps in the barn." The words had haunted her all day, echoing through her mind, no matter how she tried to push them away. Now, as twilight deepened, she couldn't resist anymore. Something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps fate, pulled her toward that place. Each step through the tall grass felt heavier than the last. The ground seemed to sink under her shoes, swallowing her footsteps. Behind her, the plantation house loomed, its windows dark and watchful. Somewhere inside, her mother would be preparing for dinner, unaware that her daughter was slipping away into the dusk. Evelyn hesitated at the fence. The wood was splintered cold beneath her touch. For a moment, she thought she heard a faint hum. Not wind, not insects, but something deeper. A vibration in the air, like the low murmur of voices far away. She stepped closer. The barn door groaned as she pushed it open, its hinges screaming in protest. A gust of stale air hit her face, a heavy, earthy scent of hay, rust, and something older. Something that didn't belong. Inside, shadows clung to every beam. Light from the setting sun slipped through the cracks, slicing the darkness into narrow ribbons of gold. Dust floated like ash. "Hello?" she called softly. Her voice was swallowed whole. Only the silence answered back. She moved deeper in. The floorboards creaked beneath her weight. Her lantern flickered, its flame quivering like it too was afraid. Old tools hung on the walls. Saws, shovels, a rusted scythe. In the far corner, covered by a torn sheet, stood what looked like a wooden crate or chest. Evelyn's breath hitched. She took another step. The air grew colder. Her candlelight dimmed, and then she heard it. Faint beneath her feet, a whisper. It wasn't words this time, not exactly. It was more like the echo of breathing, as if the ground itself were alive. She knelt, pressing her ear to the floorboards. For a moment there was nothing. Then a knock, soft, from beneath. Her whole body stiffened. She stumbled back, clutching her lantern. The flame almost went out. The knocking came again, 3 times. And then silence. Evelyn's trembling hand reached for the crate. The cloth was damp with age. When she pulled it away, a wave of dust rose into the air. The crate wasn't a crate at all. It was a trapdoor. Her breath caught. There was a lock, old and rusted, broken long ago. For a long time, she stared at it, frozen between fear and need. Every instinct told her to turn back, but the note burned in her pocket. The truth sleeps in the barn. She gripped the iron handle and pulled. The hinges moaned, and the smell that rose up from below made her gag. Damp earth and something metallic, like old blood. Her lantern light spilled into the darkness, revealing a staircase. Narrow, wooden, descending into the ground. A secret cellar. She took 1 step down. Then another. The boards groaned beneath her weight, but held. The deeper she went, the colder the air became. By the time she reached the bottom, her breath came out in white clouds. It was small, barely a room at all. The walls were stone, slick with moisture. Shelves lined one side, filled with jars, papers, and bones that looked too large to belong to animals. In the center sat an old chair, its back broken, its seat darkly stained. Her light flickered again. And for an instant, just an instant, she saw movement in the corner. Someone was standing there, a figure, pale and trembling, half hidden by shadow. A woman's shape. Evelyn's mouth went dry. "Who's there?" The figure tilted its head slowly. Her lantern sputtered. The flame flared, then steadied, and when it did, the space was empty again. Her heart pounded in her ears. She backed away, her shoulder hitting the low ceiling. As she turned to climb the stairs, something on the wall caught her eye. Carved into the stone, faint but clear. A name. Evelyn Whitmore. Her own name. She stumbled backward, dropping the lantern. It hit the floor with a sharp crack, the glass shattering, the light dying instantly. Darkness swallowed her whole. In the pitch black, she heard the whispers again, closer this time, circling her, rising from the walls themselves. Evelyn. She knows. She knows. Her hands fumbled blindly for the stairs. When she found them, she climbed fast, breath ragged, fingers scraping splinters. She burst through the trapdoor, slamming it shut behind her, her heart racing so hard she thought it might break. Outside, night had fallen completely. The stars were hidden behind thick clouds. She ran across the field, not daring to look back. Only when she reached the house did she stop. Gasping for air, her dress torn, her lantern gone. From across the dark field, the barn stood still, silent, but as the wind shifted, she swore she saw something. A faint orange glow through the cracks in the wood, like a candle burning deep underground, and for the first time, she wondered if the barn wasn't cursed at all. Maybe it was alive. The sky over the Whitmore plantation began to darken long before sunset. Thick, swollen clouds rolled in from the east, bruised purple and black, swallowing what little light remained. The air was heavy, too heavy, and the wind carried the strange, metallic scent that comes before a storm. By the time the first crack of thunder echoed across the fields, the servants were already rushing to shutter the windows. The dogs had begun to howl. Even the horses in the stables kicked against their stalls, restless, uneasy. It was as if the whole land could feel something coming, something far worse than rain. Lady Margaret stood on the veranda, watching the horizon. Her silver hair whipped around her face, and for the first time there was something uncertain in her eyes. "A storm like this doesn't belong in October," she muttered to herself. Inside, Evelyn sat by the fire, clutching a blanket to her chest. Her hands still smelled faintly of soil and iron from the barn cellar. She hadn't told her mother what she'd found. The carved name, the whispers, the cold breath that felt too close to be imagined. She had barely slept since that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her name scratched into the stone and heard her own voice echoing back from the dark. She had tried to convince herself it was nothing, just her mind playing tricks. But deep down she knew something had been waiting in that barn, and now it was awake. Thunder rolled again, shaking the window panes. A candle on the mantel flickered out. Evelyn jumped. Lady Margaret entered the room, the hem of her dark gown brushing the floor. "The storm will be bad tonight," she said. "Stay inside, Evelyn. I don't want you wandering about." "I won't," Evelyn whispered. Her mother paused, her eyes falling on the dirt stain still faintly clinging to Evelyn's skirt. "Have you been outside again?" "No." Lady Margaret's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. She turned toward the hall, her silhouette framed by lightning through the window. For a brief moment the flash revealed her expression, not anger this time, but fear. Outside, the wind howled, and the first sheets of rain began to fall, hard, relentless. The house groaned as if it were alive, its old beams creaking under the storm's weight. Hours passed. The storm raged on, louder and louder. Water ran down the chimney, extinguishing the fire. The house was plunged into shadow. Then, through the noise came a new sound. Knock, knock, knock. Evelyn froze. The sound came from the front door. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. Who would come here now? She whispered. She stood hesitating, then crept toward the hall. The candle she carried threw long, trembling shadows across the walls. The knocking came again, louder this time. She reached the door and pressed her ear against it. Nothing. Just the rain, then a voice, faint, childlike. "Let me in." Evelyn's breath caught. The voice was soft, distant, but familiar. "Who's there?" She called. "Please, let me in." She took a step back. The candle flickered wildly. Lightning flashed, and for the briefest second through the glass pane she saw it. A small figure standing in the downpour, drenched and motionless. A girl, her own face staring back at her. Evelyn screamed and stumbled backward. The candle dropped, the flame dying instantly. She ran toward the stairs, heart hammering in her chest. From somewhere behind her, Lady Margaret's voice rang out. "Evelyn, what's happening?" Evelyn could barely speak. "There's someone at the door. She looked like me." Before her mother could answer, another flash of lightning split the sky, and the entire house shuddered. A deafening crack echoed through the walls. Somewhere in the distance, something heavy collapsed. The servants screamed, then came the smell of smoke. Lady Margaret rushed toward the window and froze. "No," she whispered. The barn was burning. Through the sheets of rain, flames rose from its roof, twisting and writhing against the storm. The fire should have died under that much rain, but it didn't. It spread bright and furious, defying the thunder. Without thinking, Evelyn ran for the door. "Evelyn, stop!" her mother shouted, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Something inside her, the same voice that had called from the darkness, was pulling her toward the flames. She burst into the rain, the wind slapping her face, her dress plastered to her skin. The world was chaos, lightning flashing, thunder rolling, the barn a torch in the night. She could barely see through the smoke and rain. When she reached the field, she heard it again. That whisper, only now it wasn't faint. It was all around her. "Come back, Evelyn." She stumbled closer, tears mixing with the rain. The barn's doors swung open on their own, the firelight pouring out like a living thing. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw shapes moving inside the flames, figures, human-shaped, watching her. Then from within, she heard her name one last time, not a whisper this time, but a scream, "Evelyn." And then, everything went silent. A blinding flash lit up the sky. Lightning struck the barn again. The explosion of light and sound threw Evelyn backward into the mud. When she lifted her head, the barn was gone. Just a pile of burning timber collapsing into itself. Her mother's voice echoed faintly from the porch, calling her name over and over, but Evelyn didn't answer. Because as she stared into the flames, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the heart of the fire, for just a second, she saw her own face, staring back at her, smiling, and then it vanished. The storm broke just before sunrise. By dawn, the rain had slowed to a whisper, dripping from the eaves in weary rhythm. The world outside lay still, grey and heavy with mist. The fields were flooded, the air smelled of ash, and the barn, what was left of it, was nothing but blackened ruins. The fire had burned unnaturally, too bright, too long, as if the wood itself had wanted to burn. Even now, a faint smoke curled upward, dissolving into the morning fog like the ghost of something that refused to die. Lady Margaret stood barefoot in the mud, her nightgown soaked through, her hair undone. She didn't look like a mistress of wealth and power anymore. She looked like a woman hollowed out by fear. Around her, the servants whispered prayers under their breath. No one dared to speak too loudly. The air still felt cursed. "Find her," Lady Margaret said finally, her voice sharp, trembling beneath the surface. "Find my daughter." They searched the fields first, the garden paths, the orchards, the nearby creek. But there was no sign of Evelyn, only a single blue ribbon, half buried in the mud near the remains of the barn door. The old caretaker, Samuel, picked it up carefully and handed it to his mistress. His hands shook. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we didn't find no body." Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Then she's alive," Samuel hesitated. "Maybe so, but—" He glanced toward the ruins, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The ground there. It's hollow now, like something underneath broke loose." Margaret turned away. "Enough," she snapped. "You will not speak such foolishness. Evelyn ran away, do you understand? She ran away from her duties, from this house, from me. That's the end of it." But even as she said the words, her eyes flicked toward the smoking barn, and her hand clutched the ribbon so tightly it tore. The rest of the day passed in uneasy quiet. The workers rebuilt fences, cleaned debris, and tried to pretend nothing had happened. But the truth was, no one could forget the screams from the night before. The sound that had risen above the thunder, so raw and human it made the blood run cold. Some swore they'd seen a figure inside the flames, a woman, arms outstretched, her hair whipping like smoke. Others said they heard laughter, soft and distant, carried on the wind long after the fire died. By evening, the story had already begun to twist and grow. The preacher in town said the Whitmore house was cursed, punishment for sins buried deep in the soil. The women whispered that the daughter had been taken by the devil himself. The men muttered that Lady Margaret had finally gone too far, and her past had come calling. Inside the great house, silence ruled. The storm had left the roof leaking, the windows cracked. In Evelyn's room, the curtains still swayed, though the air was still. Her diary lay open on the desk, the ink smudged where the rain had come through the broken glass. The last entry read, "If the voices are real, then I am not alone. If they are not, then God help me, for I soon will be." Lady Margaret found it that night. She read the words again and again, her expression blank. When she finished, she closed the diary and pressed it to her chest. For a moment she looked like she might cry, but Lady Margaret Whitmore did not cry, not even for her daughter. She locked the diary away in her husband's old study and gave strict orders that no one was to mention Evelyn's name again. Days turned to weeks. The fields dried, and the barn's ruins sank deeper into the ground, swallowed slowly by weeds and time. But strange things began to happen after that night. The servants whispered of footsteps in the halls after midnight, of soft knocking from Evelyn's empty room, of the smell of lavender and candle wax drifting down the corridors when no candles were lit. One morning, the cook found muddy footprints leading from the front door all the way to the stairs, small footprints, bare, childlike. They ended just outside Evelyn's room. Lady Margaret ordered the floors scrubbed. But that night, the prince returned. The caretaker left soon after, saying he couldn't bear the feeling anymore, that every time he passed the ruined barn, he heard someone breathing beneath the earth. By the end of the month, half the servants had left. Those who remained kept their heads down and their prayers whispered. And Lady Margaret, proud, unyielding Lady Margaret, began to unravel. She no longer sat on the porch in the mornings. She no longer went to church on Sundays. Instead, she would stand at the window of her study, staring out at the field where the barn had once stood. Sometimes she would whisper her daughter's name, though no one was ever meant to hear. On the last day of November, just before dawn, the maid woke to find her mistress gone. The front door was open, swinging in the wind. Outside, the fog was thick, almost glowing in the moonlight. The maid followed the trail of footprints across the yard. Small, light steps leading toward the ruins. And there, in the grey half-light, she saw her, Lady Margaret, standing in the ashes of the barn. Her hands clasped as if in prayer, she was whispering softly, her voice trembling. "Evelyn, if you can hear me, forgive me." The maid turned to fetch help. But when she looked back, Lady Margaret was gone. The only thing left was her night shawl, lying on the cold black soil by sunrise. The house was silent again. 2 women, mother and daughter, gone without a trace. And from that day on, the people of the county said that when the fog rolled in just before dawn, you could hear 2 voices on the wind. One crying, one calling back, both whispering from the ruins of the barn. Weeks passed. The Whitmore plantation stood silent, its grand columns streaked with soot, its gardens overgrown, its windows clouded with dust. The once bustling estate now looked like a memory the world had decided to forget. But the story of the vanished women, mother and daughter, spread far beyond the parish line. At first, it was gossip, whispers in church pews, murmurs at the market. But when the 3rd servant vanished, the maid who'd seen Lady Margaret at the barn that final night, the whispers grew into something darker. People started saying the ground at Whitmore was wrong, that it moved when you stepped on it, that the air there felt too cold, even under the summer sun. So when Reverend Silas Claiborne arrived from Charleston, claiming he'd been called by the Lord to cleanse a house of unholy unrest, no one dared stop him. He came on horseback, a tall man with a long black coat and a silver cross that flashed like lightning when he spoke. His eyes were sharp, but there was a weariness behind them, the kind that comes from seeing too many things that don't belong in this world. The villagers led him to the edge of the plantation, but refused to go further. "It ain't right." "Reverend," one said, clutching his hat, "that place swallows people whole. If you walk in, you best be ready not to walk out." Reverend Claiborne dismounted and stared at the house. The wind moved through the trees, whispering faintly, like voices trying to warn him. "I've faced worse than whispers," he said quietly, and walked on. Inside the plantation, time seemed to hold its breath. Dust hung thick in the air, the scent of smoke still faint beneath layers of decay. A single chair lay overturned in the hall, as if someone had fled mid-step. The floorboards groaned with every movement, but not from his feet. They groaned like something alive beneath the wood. The Reverend crossed himself and began his inspection. He started in Evelyn's room. The air there felt different, colder, heavier. Her diary was gone, but the impression of it remained on the desk, a faint outline in the dust. The window had been nailed shut from the outside, though the nails were rusted through, as if someone, or something, had clawed at them trying to escape. On the wall, faint but visible, were small scratches. Not random, deliberate. Words. He leaned closer and whispered them aloud. "She sees me." The Reverend stepped back slowly. That night he made camp in the parlor. He lit candles in a ring and began to read aloud from Scripture. His voice echoed through the empty halls, calm, steady, unwavering. But every time he paused to take a breath, the silence that followed seemed to pulse, like the house itself was breathing with him. Near midnight, the temperature dropped. The flames flickered, bending all in one direction, toward the back door. The barn. Reverend Claiborne rose and followed the pull. The night outside was thick with fog, but the path was clear, the grass flattened by unseen feet. When he reached the ruins, he saw something strange. The earth around the barn was caved inward like the remains of a sinkhole. In the center, where the fire had burned hottest, the soil had turned black and glassy, fused by unnatural heat. He knelt, pressing a hand to the ground. It was still warm. Then came the sound, a slow, dragging whisper too soft to be the wind. It seemed to rise from the soil itself, low, rhythmic, like someone breathing through dirt. "Evelyn." It sighed. Reverend Claiborne froze. He whispered a prayer, but the name came again, closer this time, clearer. "Evelyn, "Evelyn." He turned to leave, but something caught his eye. Near the edge of the pit, half buried in the mud, was a small, weathered box. He pulled it free, brushing away the dirt. The latch was rusted, but it opened with a single twist. Inside were papers, damp, yellowed, and a small lock of blonde hair tied with a blue ribbon. Evelyn's hair. He unfolded the papers. They weren't letters. They were records, house records written in Lady Margaret's own hand. Lists of names, dates, and something worse. Next to each name, a word written in the same cold, perfect script. Corrected. Erased. Returned to the soil. The Reverend's stomach turned. He flipped to the last page. There, dated just weeks before the storm, was one more name, scrawled hastily, the ink blurred as if by tears. Evelyn Whitmore, final offering. The wind howled suddenly, ripping the papers from his hand. They scattered like dying birds into the dark. Then came the sound again, this time from below him. The ground shifted, breathing, cracking open just enough for a faint light to glow through the soil, soft. Flickering like candlelight, he stumbled back, clutching his cross, and whispered, "What have you done, Lady Margaret?" The ground shuddered. The whisper became a wail, and for a brief, terrible second, he heard them. Dozens of voices rising together, crying, calling, whispering names that had long been buried. He fled the barn and didn't stop until he reached the porch. At dawn, the Reverend returned to town, mud covering his boots and a haunted look in his eyes. When the townsfolk gathered around, he spoke just once. "There are sins," he said, "that no prayer can cleanse, and the earth at Whitmore will not rest until the truth is spoken." He promised to come back with help, to dig, to uncover whatever lay beneath. But when he returned a week later with 2 men from the parish, the ground where the barn had stood was flat again, smooth, untouched, no sign of a pit, no box. No ashes, only a single blue ribbon lying on the soil. He kept it in his pocket until the day he died. Years slipped by like fog through broken windows. The Whitmore plantation, once the pride of the county, had been reclaimed by silence. The fields lay empty, the shutters hung crooked, and ivy crawled over the whitewashed walls like green veins. The people in town still spoke of it, never by name but in whispers. Some said the ghosts of Lady Margaret and her daughter could be heard on quiet nights, weeping through the cane fields. Others swore that if you stood by the ruins of the barn and called Evelyn's name 3 times, the earth would stir beneath your feet. Most stayed far away, but not Thomas Granger. He was young, barely 20, one of the last remaining workers who had once served the Whitmore family before everything turned to ash. He didn't believe in ghosts, or at least that's what he told himself. Hunger and desperation have a way of making men brave in foolish ways. So when he heard that no one had set foot in the main house for nearly a decade, he decided to go back. He told himself he was looking for valuables, silver, jewelry, anything that could be sold. But deep down he wanted something else. He wanted answers, because he had been there the night Evelyn disappeared. He had seen the flames, and though he'd never told a soul, he still woke up some nights to the sound of her voice whispering through the dark. He arrived at the plantation just after dusk. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and makes every breath heavy. The front door hung open, groaning on its hinges. Inside, the smell hit him first. Old wood, mold, and the faint sweetness of decaying flowers. The kind of smell that lingers long after death. Thomas struck a match and lit his lantern. The flame flickered weakly, casting long shadows along the hallway. Dust floated through the air like tiny spirits. He moved room to room, the parlor, the dining hall, the library. Everything was frozen in time. A teacup still sat half full on the mantel. A child's doll rested on the staircase, its porcelain face cracked right down the middle. Then, at the top of the stairs, he found Evelyn's door. It was closed, the only door in the house that was. For a long moment, Thomas just stared at it. His hand hovered over the handle, his breath shallow. Then he pushed it open. The air inside was colder, so cold that the flame in his lantern shrank to a shiver. Evelyn's room looked untouched. Her writing desk sat near the window, covered in a fine layer of dust. The curtains, though moth-eaten, still swayed gently. Though there was no breeze, on the bed lay a single book. Small, leather-bound, and tied with a faded blue ribbon. Thomas froze. The ribbon looked familiar, impossibly familiar. He lifted the book with trembling hands. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed, but when he opened it, the handwriting inside was delicate, looping, undeniably feminine. Evelyn Whitmore. It was her journal, the one no one had ever found. He sat down on the edge of the bed and began to read. April 3rd, 1842. Mama says the barn is holy ground. She says it's where the soil remembers who we are. But the ground doesn't feel holy to me. It feels hungry. Thomas turned the page. April 10th, Mama made me watch today. She said I must understand what happens when someone disobeys. The men were afraid. Their eyes said so. I wanted to look away, but Mama held my chin. She said it was my duty to witness correction. The ground moved afterward. I swear it did. His heart pounded. The lantern hissed softly. May send I hear them at night, the ones she buried. They whisper my name. I think they know I'm next. A chill swept through the room. Thomas's breath fogged in the air. He turned another page near the end. The handwriting had changed. It was frantic now, uneven, written by a trembling hand. June 14th. She said I must go to the barn tonight. She said the storm will wash me clean. But I don't think I'll come back. If anyone finds this, know that the voices were never evil. They were only trying to warn me. The last line was smudged, the ink bled by water or tears. Thomas's hand shook as he closed the journal, then faintly he heard it. A sound behind him. A soft creak, like a footstep on the floorboards. He turned, the lantern shaking. The room was empty, but the curtains had stopped moving. He stood quickly, backing toward the door. Then, just as he reached for the handle, he heard another sound. A soft tap, tap, tap on the glass window. Slow, rhythmic. He turned his head just enough to see it. A handprint. On the inside of the window, small, pale, fresh, he dropped the lantern. The flame went out. Darkness swallowed the room whole. In the pitch black, a whisper brushed against his ear. Thank you for finding me. Thomas stumbled backward, fumbling for the door. He burst into the hallway, gasping, the journal clutched to his chest. He didn't stop running until he reached the edge of the property. By dawn, he was gone, vanished from town. The journal the only proof he'd ever been there. Weeks later, the sheriff found it lying on the porch of the church, wrapped neatly in cloth. No note, no sign of Thomas. The preacher who read it aloud said it felt more like a confession than a diary. A girl's desperate attempt to tell the truth before the earth claimed her too. After that, no one doubted the whispers anymore, and on certain nights, when the fog rolled in thick across the fields, townsfolk swore they could see a lantern flickering in Evelyn's window, and the faint shape of a young woman sitting by her desk, still writing, still trying to finish her story. It was late autumn when Reverend Silas Claiborne returned to the Whitmore lands. The world around him had changed. The river had shifted its course, the roads were worn by time, and most of the people who remembered the Whitmore name were either buried or too old to speak of it. But he couldn't forget. The dreams had followed him for years. Every night he saw fire, and a pale figure standing in it, whispering words he could never quite hear. Sometimes she called his name, sometimes she only wept. When word reached him that a journal, Evelyn's journal, had been found and turned over to the parish, he knew he had to return. Not to save the house, but to bury what still lingered there. He arrived at dusk, the sun melting behind the tree line like blood in water. The air was unnaturally still. Even the birds refused to sing. He carried little with him, only a Bible, a lantern, and the leather-bound journal wrapped in cloth. Its weight felt heavier than any sermon he had ever preached. As he stepped through the cracked gates, the house loomed ahead, skeletal and pale under the dying light. The wind whispered through the shutters, sounding almost like breath. He stopped at the porch, lit his lantern, and spoke softly to the emptiness. "I've come back, Miss Evelyn." The flame flickered as if answering. Inside, the house greeted him like a crypt, still and suffocating. Every board groaned beneath his weight. The wallpaper hung in tatters, and the scent of smoke still lingered faintly beneath the dust. He made his way to the parlor, where years ago he'd read his first prayer here. The very same room where Lady Margaret once sat, hands folded, pretending not to tremble. He placed the journal on the table and opened it again. The handwriting was just as fragile, just as haunting. He read the final entry aloud. "She said I must go to the barn tonight. She said the storm will wash me clean, but I don't think I'll come back. The voices are loud now. They are calling my name. I think they want me to join them." The Reverend exhaled slowly. "Lord have mercy." He turned the page and froze. There was one more entry, one that hadn't been there before. The ink was fresh. "You came back, Reverend. Now you will see." The lantern dimmed. The air grew colder. From somewhere deep in the house came a faint creak, a door opening, slow and deliberate. He turned toward the sound, every nerve screaming. "Who's there?" Silence, then a whisper. "Downstairs." The voice was faint, feminine. He followed. The stairwell groaned as he descended, the lantern light quivering with each step. The cellar door waited at the end of the corridor, half rotted, its hinges black with rust. He hesitated, remembering the words Evelyn had written. "The ground doesn't feel holy. It feels hungry." He pushed the door open. The cellar yawned beneath him like a grave. The air was thick, moist, heavy with the smell of soil and something older, decay, perhaps, or the memory of it. His lantern light fell upon the walls, and what he saw made his heart freeze. Names, dozens of them, carved into the stone, each etched by a trembling hand, some old and faded, others fresh. At the very bottom, half buried in dirt, he saw the last one, Evelyn Whitmore. His hands shook as he brushed the dirt away, and beneath her name was another, smaller, Margaret Whitmore. The lantern flickered violently. Then came a sound, soft like fabric dragging across the floor. He turned and saw her, a figure standing at the far end of the cellar, cloaked in white. Her face pale as moonlight, her hair long and damp, her eyes black as the earth. "Evelyn," he whispered. The figure tilted her head, her lips trembling as if trying to remember how to speak. "You found it," she said, her voice a melody of sorrow and echo. "I read your words," he replied, his voice shaking. "I know what your mother did. I know the truth now." Her gaze drifted toward the floor. "She said it was to save us, but the ground took more than it gave." "What happened that night, child?" Her eyes lifted, and for the first time he saw the anguish behind them. "She used the storm," Evelyn whispered. "She used me. She said the lightning would cleanse the family name. But it wasn't God she prayed to, Reverend." The air around them grew heavy, pressing against his chest. The ground trembled faintly beneath his feet. "She offered their lives to keep her sins buried," Evelyn continued. "Every secret, every cruelty, buried in this soil under this house. Until the earth grew full, and it began to whisper back." The Reverend clutched his cross, his voice breaking. "And you?" Evelyn's expression softened. "I saw what she did. I tried to stop her, but she gave me to it too." The lantern's flame burst, flaring bright, illuminating the cellar walls, and for a single terrible moment he saw them. Faces, faintly visible in the stone, eyes open, mouths silent, frozen in eternal scream. The light flickered. Evelyn stepped closer. "You must let it end," she said softly. "Burn it all. The barn, the house, the soil itself. And you?" he asked. Her smile was sad. "When the fire comes, I will finally rest." The wind howled through the cracks in the cellar, carrying the faint sound of a woman's laughter, cold, distant, fading. The Reverend dropped to his knees, whispering a prayer that trembled in his throat. When he looked up again, Evelyn was gone. Only the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air, and the journal, open beside him on the floor, on its final page. New words had appeared. Set us free. He rose slowly, his hands shaking, and looked toward the stairway. The house above seemed to groan, alive and restless. It was time. He picked up the lantern and turned toward the door. As he stepped out into the night, thunder rumbled in the distance, a storm brewing once again over the cursed plantation. And in that moment, Reverend Silas Claiborne knew the whispers weren't finished. Not yet. The storm returned on the third night. Thick clouds rolled in from the horizon, swallowing the moon. The wind tore through the cane fields like a wounded animal, bending the stalks to the ground. The Reverend had seen storms before, but this one felt summoned. He stood at the edge of the field, lantern in hand, staring at the dark shape of the barn, or what was left of it. It had been rebuilt in part by hands that didn't understand what they were restoring. The county had used it for storage, lumber, sometimes shelter for travelers. But now it stood hollow again, the air around it shivering as if the land itself was waiting. Behind him stood 3 men from town, the blacksmith, the stable hand, and the preacher's young apprentice. None of them spoke. Their faces were pale, their torches shaking in the wind. "Are you sure, Reverend?" the blacksmith asked. "That place, it's not right." Claiborne's eyes stayed fixed on the barn. "I'm sure. The dead can't rest while this ground still breathes." He set the lantern down and reached into his satchel. Inside was Evelyn's journal, wrapped once more in its cloth. He placed it gently on the earth before the barn doors, as if returning something sacred. Then he struck a match. The others followed, each lighting their torches, their faces painted gold by the flickering flames. Thunder rumbled overhead, deep and rolling but not far off. It sounded inside the earth. The barn's walls groaned as the wind picked up, and for a moment it seemed to lean toward them, like something waking from sleep. The Reverend spoke softly, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Lord, forgive us our trespasses. Let this ground find peace." Then he hurled the torch into the hay. The fire caught instantly, too quickly. The flames leapt from bale to beam, crawling up the wooden walls like fingers searching for air. Within moments the barn was an inferno, glowing orange, snapping, screaming. The men stepped back, shielding their faces from the heat. The Reverend didn't move. He stared into the fire, his expression grim, his eyes reflecting the chaos inside, and then they heard it, a sound rising beneath the crackle and roar. Not the wind, not the fire. Voices, dozens of them, crying, whispering, screaming. The apprentice dropped his torch. "God above," he whispered. "They're inside." The Reverend shook his head. "No, they've always been inside." From within the flames, shadows began to form. Faint outlines, human-shaped, flickering between the smoke. They twisted, reached, and vanished again, as if struggling to escape the fire or embrace it. Then, from the heart of the barn, a woman's voice rose above them all, clear, sorrowful and commanding. "Reverend?" The others turned, terrified. The Reverend took a step closer. Through the firelight he saw her, Evelyn. Or something that once was Evelyn. She stood in the center of the burning barn, untouched by flame, her white dress glowing like a specter. Her eyes, dark, endless, fixed on him. "You did as I asked," she said softly, her voice trembling like wind through broken glass. "You brought the fire." "Yes," he whispered. "It's time to set you free." Her expression changed. Not sorrow, not gratitude, but something deeper. "No, Reverend," she said. "It's time to set her free." The fire roared higher. The ground beneath them shook. From the shadows behind Evelyn, another figure began to take shape. Taller, draped in black, her hair long and silver. Lady Margaret. Her face was twisted, not in pain, but in pride. "You think fire can undo what I have done?" she hissed. Her voice echoed through the flames, rattling the earth. "I fed this land my blood, my name, my soul. The earth is mine." Evelyn turned toward her mother, tears streaking down her pale face. "You damned us all." Margaret's voice deepened, layered, not one voice, but many. "I gave you purpose. You were born to carry my sin. You were the offering. The Reverend lifted his cross, shouting over the wind, "Your sin dies tonight." The storm exploded overhead. Lightning tore across the sky, striking the barn roof. The explosion sent embers flying into the night, raining fire across the field. The men fell to their knees as the ground split open. From beneath the barn, a sickening glow seeped through the cracks, molten, red, alive. The Reverend staggered backward, shielding his face. Inside the flames, the two figures, mother and daughter, stood locked in place, their voices rising in unison, one in anger, one in sorrow. Then Evelyn turned to him. "Do it, Reverend," she cried. "Finish it." He lifted his cross again, his voice breaking through the storm. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, let this land be clean." The fire flared brighter than lightning. The ground convulsed, swallowing the last of the barn in a roar of flame and ash. The heat was blinding, the sound deafening. And then, in a single, tearing breath, the world went silent. When the Reverend opened his eyes, the barn was gone. Nothing remained but a circle of scorched earth and a smell of burnt iron. The men beside him were on their knees, trembling, muttering prayers that made no sound. In the center of the blackened field, a single thing remained unburned, a small blue ribbon. The Reverend picked it up with shaking hands. It was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly like the beat of a heart. Then the wind shifted, and through the smoke he thought he heard her. Evelyn's voice, faint, soft, drifting away with the embers. "Thank you." The Reverend closed his eyes. "Rest now, child." But as he turned to leave, he noticed something else. The earth beneath his feet was still breathing. The fire died before dawn. By the time the townspeople arrived, there was nothing left of the Whitmore barn but a ring of blackened earth and the faint shimmer of heat rising into the morning mist. The storm had passed, leaving the sky pale and empty, the kind of quiet that feels like the world itself holding its breath. Reverend Claiborne stood alone in the center of that silence. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with ash. The journal, Evelyn's journal, had turned to dust in his hands, carried away on the wind. Only the blue ribbon remained, knotted around his wrist like a mark. He told the others what he could, that the fire was divine judgment, that the land had been cleansed. But as he spoke, he knew that wasn't the truth, because when the flames had died and the smoke began to thin, he'd heard something. A heartbeat, faint, beneath the ground. The Reverend left the county the next day. He never preached again, and the Whitmore plantation, once the pride of the Low Country, began to rot. No one wanted the land, not even the desperate or the poor. They said the soil refused to grow anything, that the air was too heavy, too still. The house remained, its windows boarded, its rooms slowly filling with dust. Years turned to decades. The fields went to seed, the trees swallowed the fences, and the road to the estate vanished beneath creeping vines. The world forgot about Lady Margaret and her daughter, but the earth did not. Because sometimes, when the fog rolled in across the marshes, travelers said they could see it, the faint outline of a house where no house stood. Its shutters swinging, its doors open wide, and from somewhere within that ghostly silhouette, the sound of a woman crying. Others swore that if you walked near the ruins on certain nights, when the moon was thin and the air smelled of rain, you'd hear footsteps behind you, light, hesitant, like a girl walking barefoot through the grass. A few even claimed they'd seen her, a pale figure in a white dress, standing at the edge of the field, her hair moving through there was no wind. Sometimes she looked toward the horizon, sometimes toward the ground. But she never looked at the living. They called her the Barn Bride, and every few years, some curious soul would come, a historian, a ghost hunter, a writer looking for a story, and they'd dig through the ash, through the old records, through what remained of the Whitmore legacy. They'd always find the same thing, a single blue ribbon, never burned, never frayed, always warm to the touch. It was said that one woman, a young scholar from Charleston, found the ribbon one summer morning. She tied it around her wrist for good luck, laughing off the locals' warnings. That night, she dreamed of a woman in a black dress standing in the ruins whispering, The blood remembers. When she woke, there were muddy footprints on her floor. Small, bare, childlike. After that, the plantation was sealed by the state. No trespassing, no restoration, no excavation. But fences can't stop what the earth remembers. And still, the whispers spread. Some said Lady Margaret's spirit still roamed the land searching for her daughter. Others said it was Evelyn herself, wandering between worlds, neither alive nor dead, waiting for the day the ground would finally give up what it held. But the old caretaker, the only man left alive who remembered the Whitmores, told a different story. He said he'd seen them both. Not ghosts, not monsters. Just a mother and a daughter, standing hand in hand in the fields, bathed in the light of the dying sun. He said Evelyn looked at peace. Lady Margaret did not. Then he'd lower his voice, his eyes clouding. That house. It ain't gone, he'd whisper. It just knows how to hide. The tale lived on, passed through generations. Mothers told it to keep their children from wandering too far after dark. Preachers used it as a warning, that sin buried is never sin forgiven. But those who'd stood near that field knew better. It wasn't a story, it was a wound. Even now, in the right kind of silence, you can feel it. The faint hum beneath your feet, like the land itself is breathing. The wind that passes through the trees carries a scent of smoke and lilac. And somewhere far off, a single voice whispers through the dark, "Forgive me." The air shifts, and another voice answers. Softer, sorrowful, and close. So close it feels like it's right behind you. "I already have." Then the wind dies. The night returns to stillness. And the land sleeps again, but never soundly, because some stories once spoken refuse to end. They wait, they whisper, they remember, and long after the house has fallen and the people have turned to dust, the earth still holds their names. Evelyn, Margaret, mother and daughter, bound by blood, buried by fire, remembered by the wind. The past, they say, never truly dies. It just waits for someone to listen.